This is Talk is Sheep, the official podcast of the Wild Sheep Society of BC, brought to you by Sitka Gear. Come along as we bring conversations that matter to you into the high alpine. This episode is sponsored by our conservation partner, Precision Optics. Thank you Sitka Gear and Precision Optics for investing in healthy wildlife and sustainable ecosystems. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Kyle Stelter, and welcome to our summer series webinar podcast. And it's great to have everyone on. Really excited about this. So kind of the concept is we wanted to really share the incredible work that's being done on the landscape. We have kind of our 3 flagship projects out there and a ton of others. And we felt this was kind of a great way to connect with everybody and share some of the messaging and sort of allow the people that are on the ground and doing the heavy lifting to share the work that's being done. We try and communicate this stuff out through the magazine and through the podcast and obviously at our fundraisers. And we thought this would be kind of a great opportunity for everyone. So it's great to see everybody on here tonight. Thanks so much for signing up. In particular, thank you to Sitka Gear, our official sponsor. They're behind this summer and always doing a great job of supporting the conservation work that we're doing. We do have a number of upcoming webinars that we're going to be doing. The first one, obviously, tonight's Chris Procter, Fraser River Test and Remove. And then we're going to have Alicia Woods on the podcast to talk about some of our prescribed burns in Region 7B in the Peace region. We have Adam Foss is going to come on, talk about sheep hunting. And we're going to look to our listeners to see what they want to hear on that. So Adam was kind of adamant that he wanted to hear from our supporters that what they wanted to hear from him. So it's about sheep hunting, but exactly what is to be determined and will be determined by our listeners. We're going to do a horn aging course in July. We're just putting all those pieces together. Obviously, there's a lot of coordination there that's required. So with that, we'll hop into the webinar tonight. And first of all, we have Chris Procter here. Chris is the Provincial Wild Sheep Mountain Goat Specialist and leading the work on the Fraser. So welcome, Chris. Really glad to have you.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in here tonight. Just going to share my screen. So tonight I'm going to provide an update on our progress and results to date on the test and remove work we've been doing on the Fraser River. We've been doing test and remove treatments since 2020. This project actually started a year or 2 prior to that. So yeah, I've been ongoing for about 8 years now. And yeah, that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight. This is not something I do by myself. There's been a pile of people working on this. Those folks here that are highlighted in yellow are my immediate team that have worked on the design and implementation of this right from the get-go. But we've had a pile of support from other regional biologists, all the other folks showing on the screen here to actually make this project happen in the field. So a big shout out to everybody that's pitched into this so far. Just before we get into the test and remove work, I wanted to provide some background on Mycoplasma ovipneumoniae, or MOVI for short, what a test and remove program is, and tie those 2 things together so folks can understand why we're doing what we're doing. So MOVI, it's a bacteria that ultimately causes pneumonia in wild sheep, commonly sourced from domestic sheep or goats. When a wild sheep population first gets infected with MOVI, often we see pretty significant die-offs. In some cases, these die-offs can be up to 90% of a sheep herd. Commonly 50 to 90%. I think the long-term average across a bunch of herds is about 60%. This is often followed by a long period of depressed population growth or continued declines due to low lamb survival. And the mechanism that explains that and the focus of our test and remove program is that following that initial infection event, there are a proportion of the female sheep that carry that bacteria in their nose. The annual chain of transmission that we are most concerned with is from one of those females passing the bacteria to their newborn lambs. The newborn lambs pass the bacteria to each other, and the result is high summer lamb mortality. Um, and that pattern plays out on an annual basis as long as you have female sheep transmitting that bacteria to their lambs. That's where test and remove comes in. If we can identify those females that have that bacteria in their nose, potentially transmitting it to their lambs and removing those females from the herd, then we expect that that would promote higher summer lamb survival. And this graphic on the left-hand side of the screen kind of shows that. So females currently without treatment, um, passing that bacteria to the lambs. With treatment, so removing those ones that potentially do that, we hypothesize that we would promote increased lamb survival and an increased population of sheep. Without treatment, we would project to see continued declines. So a little bit of background, we're focused in two areas, the Fraser River, north of Lillooet, basically north of Lillooet, between Lillooet and Williams Lake, the chasm east of the Fraser, outside of Clinton. I'll show you a map in a minute for those unfamiliar. The graphs on the right-hand side of the screen show the population trends in sheep in both of those areas over time. So on the Fraser River, top graph, chasm, bottom graph. On the Fraser River, we've seen declines of about 70% since the 90s. From somewhere about 2,800 sheep to about 800 sheep when we started the test and remove. And we officially detected MOVI for the first time in 2011 on the Fraser River. And that was about the time that we gained the ability to actually test for that specific species of bacteria. The chasm, very similar declines in sheep numbers that happened on a much shorter time scale. Those sheep contracted MOVI over the winter of 2012, 2013, declined by about 76% that winter. There were 28 sheep surviving in the spring of 2013. We detected MOVI in those sheep right at that time. And then 7 years later, when we initiated the test and remove program, those sheep had declined by about another 50% to 15 sheep. So you can see from those graphs that following that initial infection die-off event, that both these populations were in that long-term sort of decline due to low lamb survival. Here is a map of both those areas. So the Fraser River on the left, chasm on the right. I've broken it down by nursery band. So because we knew this was going to take us quite a long time to capture and test all the sheep, we tried to break it down into just somewhat discrete bands of sheep so we could limit connectivity between those groups as we were doing the treatments. And that's the 16, 15 bands of sheep you see on the Fraser River on the map. And those bands of sheep formed the basis of our treatment program. So our approach, which differed a little bit, there's a couple different ways this is done. We by band, so by those bands I just showed on the map, we targeted all the female sheep for a one-time capture and test. We're taking nasal swabs, again, looking for those sheep that have the bacteria in their nose, a PCR test to confirm that it's Mycoplasma ovipneumoniae, and those individuals that we detect MOVI in their nose are euthanized in necropsied. All other individuals are released. Um, we put a big effort into monitoring the effectiveness of these treatments. We wanted to understand that, we were successful. There's a huge investment of time and money happening here. So we did that in three ways. We did that through lamb counts, um, post-treatment, pre-treatment, and in control areas if we had it. And we are looking for that improvement in summer lamb survival. So if successful, we would expect to see more lambs in those places. One of the ways that we can assess effectiveness of a test and remove program is to go back into the places we do a test and remove the following year, capture lambs that have been born since the treatment, and assess their level of exposure to MOVI. And we are looking for, because of that close relationship between female carriers and their lambs, we are looking for evidence that those lambs have been exposed to MOVI, which would tell us that there continues to be a female with MOVI in her nose um, in the group. And then finally, we are doing Fraser-wide population surveys. I mean, obviously, we ultimately want to see an increase in sheep numbers. So that is the third way that we are monitoring treatments. And these are the results that I'm going to go through tonight. So where we at? There's the same map I showed earlier. This time I've color coded it. The gray bands are the sheep where we've completed test and remove. The yellow are outstanding, of which there's only one, the pavilion band. And that one is, we are planning to do the test and remove there this coming winter. The table on the left shows those different bands of sheep, the number of sheep that we captured and tested in each band, and the year in which we did it. Overall, so far, we've captured about 515 sheep during the test and remove, and somewhere about 700 sheep altogether, which includes the lamb sampling that we've done and some general surveillance sampling that we did before we actually started the test and remove program. General overview of results. We've found PCR positive sheep, so sheep with MOVI in their noses in 12 of 15 bands. We are also looking for evidence that sheep have been exposed to MOVI by looking for antibodies for MOVI, so taking blood and analyzing the serum. We found MOVI antibodies in all bands of sheep, which indicates that this disease has circulated everywhere on the Fraser River um, at some point in time. And, the reason so three of those bands, we did not find a sheep with MOVI in her nose. And that is likely explained by there just simply wasn't one there at that time. Obviously, there was at some point in time because all these bands of sheep generally followed the same trends and numbers over time. But the those groups of sheep had cleared that infection on their own. The prevalence rate varied widely by band of sheep, up to 64%. Um, on average, it was about 11%. We have euthanized 54 sheep in those 15 bands, and it's turned into a pretty significant challenge to capture all these sheep. A little more difficult than we imagined when we started. I think we've done a pretty good job at it. On average, we think we've captured 98% of the females in these bands, but the range has been 80 to 100%. The sheep become highly evasive really quick, and it's a challenge to catch them all. Lamb counts. Here's kind of an overview of what we've seen with our lamb monitoring. The graph on the right shows the lambs per 100 ewes in treated areas on the left. and the lambs per 100 ewes that we observed in untreated areas on the right. On average, we see about 40 lambs per 100 ewes following a test and remove treatment. And on average, in the places we haven't done the treatments yet, we saw a little less than 20, 19. Um, so these results indicate if we are successful in identifying all those females, that consistent improvements in summer lamb survival do occur. Um, you will see on the treated side of that graph, there are a couple low values there, including 0. And those are, some of these bands of sheep after we've done the treatment, there's very few females remaining, 3 to 6 and a couple bands. So I think, there's, potentially only a couple lambs born and other mortality factors become increasingly important as the number of sheep gets smaller. In a couple cases, we weren't immediately successful in removing all the female carriers, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Drilling down, these two units, these two bands of sheep essentially comprise the west side of the Fraser River on the Region 3 side of the study area. And it is where we started. So these two units are where we have the most data. Um, and we got 5 or 6 years of data now. So those graphs, the one on the right would be or on the top is the Ward Creek band. The one on the bottom is the McCabe Black Hills band. The black points in the darkly shaded portions are the lambs per 100 ewes that we saw since we did the treatment. The gray points in the lightly shaded portions are what we saw prior to doing the treatment. And the red points are controlled immediately adjacent untreated areas that we counted lambs in just to control for the year in which we were doing those counts. So again, these results indicate that so far these improvements in summer lamb survival have been pretty durable, and we will continue to monitor this going forward. And I just wanted to speak a little bit about the sheep counts that the Wild Sheep Society organizes here. Those counts contribute to this treatment monitoring. And specifically, we're kind of interested in understanding how the lamb numbers change over the summer. But we're also interested in understanding whether anybody sees any sick lambs out there. So that's why we're putting an effort into summer lamb monitoring. I mentioned earlier that the second way we are monitoring these treatments is to evaluate the level of exposure lambs that are born since the treatment show to MOVI. So we're generally trying to get back into the treatment areas the year after. We're targeting approximately 25% of the lambs scattered across, different groups of sheep. And we are taking the same samples from those lambs. So we're taking nasal swabs to look for MOVI in their noses. We take a blood sample looking for any evidence that they have developed antibodies. These are lambs that are about 10 months of age. So far, we have been ultimately successful in 87% of those bands. We have 2 bands right now where we are just trying to figure out how we're going to proceed, but we have detected positive lambs in a couple places. And there were a couple others that we initially detected positive lambs in following the treatment. We generally, in a couple, we remove some additional sheep. That seemed to solve the issue. There's a couple where it seems like we missed a carrier female for whatever reason. We either did not catch it or the test did not pick it up. but it seems to have cleared itself over a couple of years. So I think that's another benefit of a test and remove program is, even if you're not 100% successful right off the bat, you have reduced the number of carriers potentially on the landscape, which probably likely increases the probability that they can clear it on their own quicker. Population size. So we've only done a couple surveys. We did one when we started, did another last spring. So in 2025, we've seen a 15% increase in sheep numbers on the Fraser River across the entire Fraser River so far. It's a little early for this to tell us much. You know, we did that survey. There was a mix of treated areas, untreated areas. Some of the largest groups of sheep on the Fraser River were some of those that we treated most recently. Um, and therefore, we don't really expect them to contribute to increase sheep numbers quite that quickly. So, um, pretty encouraging so far, but we'll be monitoring this in the future. Our next steps, the priority right now is to complete treatments. So pavilion this coming winter, we're starting to think about how we wrap this up and the monitoring required to do that, which will probably be further lamb sampling across the Fraser River. Still working out some of those details. And then the other monitoring of lamb numbers and population size will continue into the future as well. So we've had a ton of collaborators, a ton of funding support. Um, all these groups listed here have supported in some fashion. This program has not been cheap. I think to date, we've spent about $1.9 million. So by this coming winter, we're gonna exceed the $2 million mark. And there's a ton of other supporters that I haven't listed here. Landowners in both these places have been highly supportive of us doing this work, which wouldn't be possible without that support. So, um, yeah, yeah, ton of different people supporting this program. And with that, I can take any questions anybody has.
So, Chris, I think if you're good with it, what we'll do is we'll hear a little bit from Chris Barker from the Wild Sheep Society BC side, and then Hannah talk a little bit about the sheep counts, and then if you're cool with that, we'll go to Q&As. So, couple things for our listeners. There is a Q&A feature, I think, in your Zoom bar there. So if you click on that Q&A, you can put your questions in there, and we'll just go through those one by one after we've heard from Hannah. Just a couple things. We have some giveaways, but you have to stick around. You have to be here till the end. So we'll give those at the end. Don't want to give everything away and then everyone leave all at once. So if you don't mind, Chris, can you stop the screen share and then we'll turn it over to Chris Barker. So Chris is the project's chair and the vice president of the Wild Sheep Society BC. Chris Barker's been our boots on the ground guy on the Fraser and worked really closely with the British Columbia government in developing this and supporting and been sort of a main driver on our side, on the funding side, and just support, making sure that we're the supporting it. So, yeah, with that, over to you, Mr. Barker.
Thanks, Kyle. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, no, I just wanted to touch base. Like Chris covered the really good stuff that we do on the ground, but kind of what I wanted to touch on is just how this project started, and it was a conversation in a bar. I'm not sure who else was with us, but it was myself, Chris Procter. I'm not sure if there was a couple other people, Chris or not, but we were just sitting there and we were talking about what was going on in the Fraser and how can we help these sheep. And that conversation at one of our conventions generated this project. So for a simple conversation to generate almost a $2+ million project to reestablish sheep populations on the Fraser River came out of a simple conversation and an idea of how we can help sheep. So what I guess my message is don't limit your thought process to what can and can't be done. Put the idea out there and let's see if we can make it successful, because this is how we're being successful on the Fraser, and that's how it started. It was that simple conversation. And then, as Chris touched on, we started off, we did a prevalence testing to see what we were dealing with, and that expanded, and obviously budgets were concerned, and that's where the society came in, and we leveraged our partners and brought these partners together. And at the same time, Chris started those discussions with the First Nations on the Fraser. So I think we're the only NGO that is a member of the Fraser River Working Group, which built on this project as it went along. So as it built up and as we started to see the dollars evolving, it was like, holy smokes, we've got to really come up with a solution and make sure we get to the end goal. So, and that's kind of where the society, our partners and conversations came in, and how we became successful in bringing this project almost to its fruition. So, and I say almost to fruition, the missing piece out of this whole thing is policy and regulation from the provincial government. This $2 million we're spending right now to reestablish these Fraser River sheep can all be gone for nothing if somebody brings domestic sheep and we have a reinfection. Or are we going to go through this process of doing another treatment process on the Fraser River again, or can we nip it in the bud? But the point is, it's a pretty easy thing to solve with what has been recommended through the Minister's Special Advisory Group and the recommendations that were made through that Special Advisory Group. And they were all signed off by the Ag Minister at the time, Minister Popham, and they were put into a decision note that was signed off. And then it's faltered for policy and regulation. So for our listeners, my message is to engage your MLAs, write the minister, write the Ag Minister, write the Premier, and say, this is not good enough for what we're trying to do. If we want to have wildlife on the landscape in British Columbia, we need support from government. We're not asking for financial support. We're asking for policy and legislation. And that is the key piece that's missing from what we've accomplished on the Fraser and what we're going to try and accomplish in the Okanagan. So, and probably future disease events until we get that missing piece of the puzzle in there. So that's kind of my strong message. Again, can't thank our members supporting raffles, our fundraisers, because that's how this where your money goes is on the ground. This is where it went, was to the Fraser River. So, like I said, I just can't thank our members, our dedicated board, and our dedicated chapter and affiliates that supported us. And obviously that was a networking piece that we brought in. So, just really want to say thank you to everybody and engage your MLAs, and let's move the needle over the line for our wild sheep in British Columbia.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Hana, do you want to jump a little bit into sort of the upcoming sheep counts? And, we're all, there's the money part, which is critical, as you heard, $2 million, significant. But then there's volunteer opportunities as well. And yeah, we all want to be on the chopper with Chris, but only Chris Barker gets to pull that off, I guess. But that said, the volunteer aspect is critically important on the Fraser and the sheep counts. So if you could touch a bit on that. I know we did one last weekend, and the importance of it and what's involved with it for anyone that might be interested.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hugely important. And thank you everybody for attending this tonight. That's awesome to see the turnout that we have here. So the last count that we did last weekend was primarily focused around the Junction area and west along the Chilcotin. We had fairly good attendance from our volunteers. Unfortunately, life gets in the way, and we had quite a few individuals that had to back out at the last minute, which we do understand. It was kind of a hot and dry weekend, which wasn't optimal for spotting sheep, of course, but there were quite a few sheep spotted. Unfortunately, not as many lambs as we would have liked to have seen. We did, at the end of the day of our sheep count, some of us ended up running into some of the landowners that were previously mentioned, and they did let us know about a very large group of ewes that they had seen kind of just down below where their ranch is located. And they indicated that almost every single ewe they had seen had a lamb. So that was really, really positive. So that would have been on the Fraser River side of the junction. On the Chilcotin side of the junction, unfortunately, not nearly as many lambs seen. So hard to say. Again, it was really tough conditions. But yeah, huge thank you to everybody that came out that weekend and sweated it out in the heat of the day and glassed for these sheep. And no sick lambs were seen over the weekend, so that's also very encouraging. Yeah, we had a great time over the weekend. Everybody camped at McIntyre Lake, and we did some giveaways, and I think a bunch of the volunteers made s'mores at the end of the day and sat around and had a couple of beers, and it was a great time for everybody. Lots of camaraderie to be shared with fellow sheep hunters and conservation enthusiasts, and we will be hosting another sheep count at that location on July 11th. So ideally, it would be really, really wonderful if we could have larger volunteer attendance. I know it's difficult, and there's definitely going to be a lot of people that are getting geared up for opener up north. So I do understand if that interferes with some sheep count plans, most definitely. But yeah, the more that we can get out, the better, because then we're able to cover a lot more ground. Chris Procter and I were speaking the other day, and he had mentioned that they'd found that there is still MOVI located in the Canoe Creek, Dog Creek area. Is that correct, Chris?
Yeah, correct. We
Yeah.
have detected some MOVI positive lambs there, so that's something that we're thinking about right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So ultimately, we'd really, really like to structure our next two counts, July 11th and then August 8th it is, I believe. Sorry if I'm misspeaking about August 8th. But we'd really like to structure it so that we can still target the junction and get a better count there, get a better idea of what our lamb numbers are, as well as focusing on that Canoe Creek, Dog Creek area to kind of help Chris identify where it is that the sick lambs are. When I was speaking to Chris, he said that July is actually the month where you're going to see lambs behaving like they are sick. And by August, chances are they're dead if they're sick. So July is a crucial, crucial time for these sheep counts for us to be able to identify where our problems are. So yeah, can't encourage you guys enough to come out and join us. It's an awesome time. Like I say, we give away lots of prizes. It's beautiful, like absolutely incredible country to see. It's just gorgeous country. So it makes for a good little adventure, and we really encourage people to bring their children. It's very kid-friendly, very kid-friendly atmosphere. Lots of little hikes that your children can go on to go and glass the sheep down on the flats along the river bottom. And yeah, it's just a really good time and for a really good cause, and just one little way that we can all help as volunteers.
Hannah, where do people go if they're interested and they want to sign up? What do they need to do?
Yeah, so you guys can sign up online. You can also, if you'd like to, you can absolutely get a hold of me directly, but there is sign up on our Wild Sheep Society of BC website. You can reach out to me at exec@wildsheepsociety.com. You can give me a call, reach out to Kyle, harass him. He likes that. Yeah, lots of ways to get a hold of us.
I do. Thanks, Hannah. Okay, cool. We got some questions here. Before we kind of jump into those, first of all, work is being done down in the U.S. There's other jurisdictions that are doing test and remove, and Idaho's been one of the leaders in this as well. And it's very cool to see. I've seen there were some people sign up tonight that have been instrumental and pivotal in the work that's been done around MOVI and test and remove, specifically Dr. Helen Swanch. I think Helen's on. So Helen, thank you for your leadership and so much that you've done over literally decades on this project and still involved today. Frances Kassir, I know Frances is on, and she's been just doing an incredible job in down in Idaho and the recovery work down there. I think Holly Miyazaki was on as well. I'm not sure if she made it on. And then I see also Tom Besser signed up. So Tom's been a leading researcher for years in disease research for wild sheep. So, just a shout out to the great work that's being done. I'll put on my Wild Sheep Foundation hat for a moment here and just the Wild Sheep family. And, that the Wild Sheep family brings all of us together, right? There's so much work that's being done on the test and remove down at Sheep Show. There's test and remove work that's conversations that is happening all the time. And then, of course, the things that is being learned across the jurisdictions. I know Chris and Francis talk a lot, and others as well. So great opportunity there to collaborate and find new ways. And this is a fairly innovative way. It's fairly new, test and remove to our space, which I'll let Chris speak to that. I'm in no place to talk to that. Now, before we go to the questions, also, I just want to again shout out to, again, Chris mentioned the partners, but Chris himself, Chris Procter, your leadership on this has been incredible, and the work that you're doing with your team and so many others involved. Wild Sheep Foundation has been our biggest supporter. That's the big funder on this project. And there's no question it wouldn't have happened if we didn't have the support of the Wild Sheep Foundation. So a huge shout out to the Wild Sheep Foundation and what they're doing. Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation's been a pivotal part of this and been an early adopter and been very supportive of the project and been fantastic. And then Abbotsford Fish and Game, I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize the great work. They were an early adopter. They've been supporting this project for years. And again, this is a Lower Mainland Fish and Game Club, and they're supporting conservation on the Fraser River. So super cool to see that engagement and support, and we're super grateful for all the great work. And I think Carrie and maybe Ian's on tonight, so thank you guys for all the work that you do. Midwest chapter of the Wild Sheep Foundation, again, an early adopter, 5 or 6 years now in the project and been very supportive. And then I don't know that Ben Barakoff's on tonight, but Canadian Wildlife Capture, they've been phenomenal. Ben's done all the capture work on the Fraser, and I think 10% of everything that gets done is donated back in terms of time. So incredible support there. I think Jordan Smalden maybe signed up. So just the team from Canadian Wildlife Capture, phenomenal. So I want to thank all those people that are involved. And I know there's people I'm missing, and I do apologize for that. But with that, we're going to go into some questions.
Hey, Kyle. One sec. Sorry to interrupt you, buddy. I think one that you probably should touch on, and it's been a great supporter, is Jurassic Classic, and just how that piece fits into this as well. So I'll just flip that back to you, bud.
Yeah, for sure. So, as many of you know, that the societies tried to fundraise specifically, certain events would support certain projects, and Jurassic Classic, Ben Barakoff and Canadian Wildlife Capture have been a big part of that event, and he's had most of his team there, brought a bunch of people to that event that's part of Canadian Wildlife Capture that's been on the Fraser, involved in this. And so we've designated the funds from the fundraiser, the Jurassic Classic, to go back. It's a shared project with Guide Outfitters Association of British Columbia and the Wild Sheep Society of BC, but that money's going back. So we're fishing on the Fraser, catching sturgeon, catch and release, and then the money we raise there goes back onto the Fraser to support this. And Sacco and Steiner, they've been a big supporter of it as well. There's been a rifle raffle we've done every year that has gone directly to funding the Fraser, and I think $20,000 goes to that every year as well. So, great collaboration, great support from our partners there. So yeah, well said, Chris. Thank you for that. All right. With that, we'll jump into some questions. So Jesse Wirch is wondering, just purely out of curiosity, those sheep that have tested positive for antibodies and are healthy, is there any evidence this may offer any sort of retained immunity moving forward? If so, is there any evidence this is being passed on to those lamb populations?
Yeah, great question. We know that immunity wanes, so those sheep that do mount an immune response do have antibodies. It doesn't last forever. It wanes over time. And we don't believe that mothers can pass that immunity on to lambs. But we suspect that bighorn sheep in general in the south, like if they get MOVI, it may not be as devastating as, for example, if stone sheep got it, that are totally naive to it, right? So there is, I don't know if I can explain that, but that's what we think.
Good stuff. Paul's asking, is there anything to be learned from the euthanized ewes, or are they disposed of without further research on them?
Well, we do a full necropsy on those individuals, and we are looking to confirm our decision for one. So, make sure that we are making the right call with removing those sheep. Um, and we're looking for a few other things that may be associated with this disease when we do that. And then beyond that, I would say that we've tried in most cases to use the meat from these individuals. So it's gone to various First Nation partners. If any of you have been to the Jurassic Classic, you've probably eaten some of these sheep there too. So we try to use it for sure.
Good stuff. Helen Swancha. So Helen's shared, so the group knows sheep farmers on the Fraser continue to be very cooperative and proactive, mostly highly interested in having their animals tested for MOVI, and when negative, wanting to buy no MOVI negative animals in the future. Um, Great. Thanks, Helen. And then Helen also shared that there's short-term immunity passed to lambs from ewes with high antibody levels, but that wanes from 4 to 8 weeks. There's no other way that immunity can be passed on. Awesome.
Thanks, Alan.
Chris, can you talk about some of the work that's been done on the Fraser? Where are we at with separation, and can you talk a little bit more on that, or I get that's kind of Jeremy's wheelhouse there, but is there areas that are big risk for reinfection right now? Is there areas of concern, or are we in pretty good shape generally on the Fraser?
Um, there's domestic sheep on the Fraser River. I would say that there's areas elsewhere in wild sheep range where we have more domestic sheep and more operations, but there's certainly a few. Um, we've tested some of those sheep, and we continue to test some of those sheep just to determine whether MOVI exists in those flocks. There's a couple outstanding ones that we have not tested. Um, but yeah, no, there's continued risk, and we are still working on the policy stuff in the background.
Yeah, tough file for sure. Yeah. Okay, I have a question from Boris here, and Boris' question is the Kootenai Bighorn population going through a similar situation in Region 3? To Region 3, sorry.
Not right now. In the province, we have MOVI here, Fraser River, um, and the South Okanagan, and that's it right now. Yeah,
Okay.
that we know about. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, Chris, one thing I'll get you to talk a little bit about is what are our next steps? So we've got year 10, we've got pavilion to treat. Are we done? Once we've done the 10 years, do we just walk away and where everything's going to be hunky-dory? Is there more work to do? What does it look like down the road?
Yeah, I think we're still working out some of those details, how we wrap this up. I think that the way I'm looking at it right now, we got to do pavilion. I think we need to follow that up with lamb sampling up and down the entire Fraser River, just as a final check as to whether we've got this beat. But I think, we got to monitor this down the road too. So, we'll be continuing to monitor lamb numbers. And I think that we're going to need to follow that. If we see cases where the lamb survival really drops off, then we might need to follow up on that just to see what's going on for sure. So no, it doesn't just end um, like that, but yeah.
Okay. Um, so then you talked about the growth on the Fraser. You've seen 15% population growth. And I know that we talked about these sort of small populations with just a handful of animals. What does that look like? What else needs to be done? So we've done some recovery work on the disease stuff, and we're still working through that. What else needs to be done? Is there habitat work? Is it supplementation? Or just let nature take its course and let the populations rebuild, hopefully disease free?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Kyle. I think we're in a situation on the Fraser River with some bands of sheep where they are so small, they're probably not going to recover on their own. So once we determine that we have this beat, then I think augmentation of those groups is going to be a priority. Um, we got, like Churn Creek, for example, we're down to 6 females there. And there used to be hundreds of sheep there. Um, and I think it's going to be, well, based on our experience elsewhere, similar small numbers of sheep, but they're probably not going to recover on their own. Or if they do, it's going to be very, very slow. So I think, I think the first step is to make sure we got this beat. The last thing you want to do is translocate sheep into there when you still have MOVI there, right? So that's our first step, and then we'll be looking to recover some of those bands through translocation. I think when the sheep numbers, if they build, obviously we are going to have to think about providing productive habitat for them. We've been lucky out there in recent years. There's a lot of big natural wildfires that have really improved the sheep habitat, but there's some other issues. Invasive grasses is one that I think we're going to be dealing with down the road. And like intensive grazing from livestock in some areas is another one that I think we probably going to have to deal with. But those are things that are definitely be on our radar as sheep numbers rebuild.
So, Chris, can you talk about what's what's the most important thing you've learned since you started this project? If you knew, 10 years ago what you know now, what would you change? So when you look at this, what are sort of the major things that you've learned? I think this whole test and remove has evolved maybe a little bit, or there's been a little bit more, I guess, experience, if you will. So maybe just touch a little bit on what you've learned most.
Well, I certainly learned that the sheep are challenging to catch. Um, we've learned all the miserable places they go to when you're harassing them, for sure. Um, but what would I do differently? We still got some challenges that we're working through. You know, detecting MOVI, even if you catch all the sheep, detecting it, making sure the test picks it up. I mean, that's a challenge too, right? There's not much you can do about that, but um, yeah, I mean, I think, I think I'd try to do this quicker is one thing. This has taken us, well, we started the treatments in 2020, it's 2026. So like 7 years of doing the treatments is a long time, right? But that was about all we could do. I think if I was going to do it again, I'd try and do that quicker in some way, but um, there's some challenges with that too, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's gone relatively well. It's gone better than we imagined when we started. We weren't even sure you could catch all the sheep. So.
Yeah. Chris, has the science evolved? So obviously you started the treatment 6 years ago. And Dr. Kate Hyvert, that she's in the lab and doing all kinds of hard work and trying to figure stuff out. Has the science changed, or is it kind of the same thing that you knew 6 years ago? Are you guys getting better information, better science that's helping you on the landscape?
I don't know if the science has changed all that much in those 6 years. We are in the midst of a meta-analysis of all the test and remove projects that we know about. So when we started, there was only a couple. Um, we based what we did a lot on what Francis had done in Idaho. Um, and that was kind of the main project that had been going on at that time. But now there are quite a few. I think at least 29 or 30 different test and remove projects. So we are in the process of doing a meta-analysis of all these projects to see if we can learn and provide better guidance on how to do one of these if you're going to do one, or what are the predictors that make this successful versus not, that kind of stuff. So that's happening right now, but um, Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, I didn't really dive into it, but earlier there's a couple different approaches to doing test and remove. We took one approach, the approach that well, I don't even know if it's the most common approach now, but certainly when we started, the common approach was to capture sheep multiple times and only remove those ones that test positive every time. Um, we chose not to do that. We chose the one strike approach. If you've got MOVI in your nose, you're getting removed kind of thing. What we can learn across these different projects that have tried different approaches, I think may help inform how one does this in the future. But um, yeah, we're sticking with there have been some improvements though. Like, one of the ways that we do a PCR test is actually in the field with a portable PCR. So when we first started, that was pretty brand new. And, I think we had a bit of a learning curve interpreting the results from that. And we've had some help along the way from Kate and crew, which has helped a lot. And I think we've gotten better at that as time went by. So, I think we were making better decisions um, later on than we were initially. But so there's definitely been some improvements there.
Awesome. A quick question for you on that. So you talked about the work that Francis is doing, and I think Idaho is a two-strike approach. They had that versus we doing the one strike. Did you guys see a prevalence rate or like an attrition rate, a kill rate effectively higher in either jurisdiction? Is one higher than the other, or does the numbers basically 15% or whatever that is?
No, I would say that we are removing more sheep than the two strike approach would.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's complicated. I didn't really dive into it, but these sheep, um, these carriers may not have it in their nose all the time, right? So they can intermittently shed the bacteria. Um, the two strike approach is meant to focus on those individuals that chronically have it in their nose, a chronic carrier. This approach, we are removing sheep that may not be chronic carriers, but obviously they have it in the nose when we catch it. So, um, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Now, I got a bunch of questions online here, and I'll get to them in a sec. But one last one: does WAFA's Wild Sheep Working Group do they provide guidance around test and remove now? Like I know it was so early, like 6 years ago or 8 years ago. Is there, or is that what that meta-analysis is gonna like a gold standard of what's expected for test and remove? What's the involvement of the Wild Sheep Working Group on that?
Yeah, the Wild Sheep Working Group or the Wild Sheep Initiative, as it's called now, they have put out a test and remove guide. But those guidelines in there we expect probably will be revamped once we are done with the meta-analysis. So that's one of the objectives of doing that work is to, what is the best way to do a test and remove program if you're going to do it.
Okay, very good. Um, El Jefe, president of the Wild Sheep Society BC, Greg Rensmag, is asking, how worried do we need to be about sheep that travel long distances and pass through different herds?
Yeah, I mean, we see sheep doing pretty crazy stuff. I mean, they end up all over the place at times. So I think that just speaks to the risk of this issue, uh, in general on the landscape. I mean, where you might think you never see a wild sheep, you may see one there one day. So yeah, Greg, it's a good question. And I mean, obviously one that's hard to manage. But yeah, it can happen for sure. I mean, these sheep they wander.
So, what's the approach, Chris, if you get a sheep that ends up that is like maybe got a collar on it or whatever, it's from a different herd and it ends up on the Fraser? Are you guys going to try and capture it and test it, or do you, like, I know there was a policy for a while, or it seemed like it, that where if there was a foraying sheep in certain jurisdictions, I'm not sure about BC, but it would be removed. They'd go out, and whether it was positive or not, it would be removed. But is that something? How do you handle something like that? I guess it's really hard to tell if it's where that sheep's coming from, really.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we do anything like that on just wandering sheep. I mean, but if we do know that a wild sheep has contacted domestic sheep somewhere in one of those forays, which has happened a few times over the years, we have gone and removed those sheep. Um, it's not an easy thing to do in these landscapes. Often we get these reports, we go looking for that sheep and it's nowhere to be found, kind of thing, right? But we will generally put an effort into that.
Okay, good. I'm not going to put Chris on the spot for this because this is talking about his leadership. But Chris, Chris Barker, if you want to jump in on it, what would legislation from our government in support of this project specifically look like? Looking for specific subject matter to include in a letter to my MLA. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think, first and foremost is the decision note was the formwork of a bunch of people in that Ministers Special Advisory Group. And there was a bunch of recommendations in there. Some of them were related to policy or regulation, depending on how I can move through those things. But one of the key components that we all of us advocated for initially was these volunteer measures, which were around 4-H, an education component for 4-H, two young, potential sheep producers coming in to be aware of what those risks were and how they could, successfully manage their flocks. And the society supported some of those measures with 4-H. We supported the 4-H at Armstrong, the Fall Fair in Armstrong. We supported that for 3 or 4 years. So that was one of the volunteer measures. This education component for 4-H and producers is a big one. Really doesn't cost a lot of money to implement something like that. There was a combination of testing for domestic sheep producers, and Helen Swansha led that, and that was funded by the Wild Sheep Society of BC. Ag jumped in on that a few years later and then disbanded that funding. So there's been support and then it's waned. So really what we're looking for is sustainable support from agriculture, from the Ministry of Agriculture, around what this looks like. They keep flipping it back and saying it's a walrus issue. It's not a walrus issue. The Right to Farm Act trumps any bylaws, anything a regional district wants to put in, any of those nuances that affect the Right to Farm Act. The Right to Farm Act kind of trumps any other component. So it's either an amendment to the Right to Farm Act or a policy that comes in from Ministry of Ag dictating what that, and that's kind of where that decision note comes in around the recommendations that were in that decision note that the minister signed off on. So, short and sweet would be in your letter, what we want is the minister to revisit that decision note and implement the volunteer measures and look at implementing some of those recommendations that she signed off on and put those into some policy work. And obviously still trying to support the domestic sheep industry. So that's one of the things, the society's done kind of hand in hand with this test and remove piece. One of the pieces of the puzzle was, how do we educate domestic sheep producers around the risks of MOVI and transfer of disease to wild sheep, but also to their own flocks? And can they get better production or better meat, lambs, various components there? Because it does affect certain species of domestic sheep in different ways. And I won't dive too deep into, the successes and failures of that. But I mean, we have had successes. We have had lots of great relationship with domestic sheep producers. And I think that's just building on what our approach was. So, one of the last ones, I think, if I just touch on it really briefly, was there was a producer in an area where we were trying to do a transplant, and we were down to the last minute to actually move these sheep. And we're all kind of going, well, we can't move sheep if these sheep are positive. Turns out they were positive. But there was a relationship built by one of the proponents on the transplant team that reached out to that domestic sheep producer, and she actually turned herself around with that relationship and got rid of her positive sheep, moved one of the other positive sheep she wanted to keep, and kept her negative sheep. So domestic sheep producers are willing to work with us around this issue. It's trying to get government in there because government doesn't want to make a decision where they think it's going to impact domestic sheep producers. But they're not supporting the industry in any way, shape, or form right now anyway. So I think they've got 10% market share. And to me, if you're an industry, you should be looking to increase your market share. One of those ways in BC, if you're having potentially MOVI-free sheep or what that looks like, you're going to promote that industry. And that's one of the things the society was working to do. So there's a bunch of pieces in there, but short and sweet, if I numbed it down to what would you say in your letter? Please implement your decision note that you signed off, Minister, and implement those volunteer measures and support what NGOs and conservation groups are doing on the landscape to keep our wild sheep populations healthy and viable.
Thanks, Chris. So a couple things. If you want some support on that, and Hannah and I, reach out to us. You've got my email, obviously, through the registration for this webinar. So reach out. Be happy to provide some documentation to support a letter. One other thing I would suggest that anyone that hasn't seen it, go to movifree.org, and there's a film called Transmission, and it really sort of does the deep dive on this issue. You'll see that the society is not anti ag. It's not anti-sheep producers. We just want policy and legislation that will protect our wild sheep populations. A bunch of people on this call right now are sheep producers. Chris himself ran sheep. Helen's a sheep producer. So we're sympathetic and we want to work through these issues. And there's enough room for both of us on the landscape, but coming up with policy around this to support what healthy wild sheep is critical. Because like we said, we spent $2 million on the Fraser and we're coming up on 10 years. And it could all go away in a heartbeat because we are not doing anything to address the core issues. So reach out to myself or Hannah. We'd be really happy to help out with that. Jordan has stated the new wild eye collars have been a game changer. Big shout out to Grant. I know Grant did register for this. I'm not sure that he's on. Chris, do you want to just talk a little bit about what those new collars are and what they're doing? I know you talked about it earlier today when we had our Fraser River sheep working group there, and I'd love you to expand on that.
Yeah, you bet. No, they've really changed the game for us. So this was the first year that we had Grant's collars, so wild eye collars. Grant built these collars for this program specifically, just from, it arose from discussions, between myself and Grant in the past. But I'll just step back and explain how we actually do this because I didn't really touch on this. But what we do is we are out there catching all these sheep. A couple times we have slung the sheep to a processing site, did the sampling there, did the collaring there, even, did the PCR test on site, made our decisions, removed the sheep we needed to, let all the other ones go. But that only works where we have some access, we get people to a site. Much of the Fraser River is pretty remote, difficult access in the winter for sure. So we transitioned from doing that. We've done that a couple times in accessible places, but what we mostly did was we are out there just catching the sheep, taking the samples, and we need to be able to find those sheep again when we get the results. So we use radio collars to do that. And, the first bunch of years we used just cheap little VHF collars. The other way that these collars are important is they help us catch all the sheep. So we'll generally do this over two different capture events. We will go out there, capture probably, 60, 70% of these sheep in a couple days. And then they get really tough to catch. They're in places, they're hiding from the helicopter, they become highly evasive. So we will give the sheep a break for a couple weeks. We will come back. We will start tracking down every one of those sheep that we collared initially the first time to catch the ones that are uncollared, untested the second time. And, tracking down radio collars emitting a VHF signal is on the Fraser River. There's tons of rock and tons of signal bounce. It's a nightmare, really. I mean, we spent so much time doing that. It's the only time I've seen Ben Berukov upset is from tracking these sheep down. So the collars that Wild Eyes built, um, they're a small collar. I don't have one here to show you, but they don't use the traditional VHF signal. I don't even know if I can explain the specific technology to you, but what they do is they're out on the landscape waiting for you to show up and say, "Hey, tell me where I'm at." So when we arrive on the scene to track these sheep down, we send a signal to each one of these callers and say, "Hey, tell me where you're at." And those callers will wake up and transmit a signal to us in the helicopter, and we will get the location on some mapping software that's associated with the tracker, which allows us to see where the sheep is. It allows us to track those sheep down in real time, like in that on that mapping software is your location too. So it's basically just going to where the sheep are, which has hugely saved us a lot of time. So, yeah, um, that's just a quick rundown on those colors.
Awesome. Yeah. Huge shout out to Grant and Wild Eyes for that technology. Helen shared that what has been very rewarding is that our approach in BC was somewhat different than others, and it's worked. We used a portable PCR unit that was not typical. Thanks to the faith in that science from Chris and all the partners, we've led in that alternative approach. So there you have it. Oh, Helen says the callers take you right to them, says Grant. Okay, so Nolan, one up, good question here, and something that we didn't touch on. Chris, you talked about capturing all the females, and Nolan's question is: you're stating that you're testing the females. Is it possible that rams traveling can carry MOVI and pass that through a herd?
Yeah, I mean, we've caught rams that carry it in their nose. When we did the initial surveillance sampling, we included rams, and we definitely caught a couple that were carrying the bacteria. We have had hunters kill rams on the Fraser River since we started that were MOVI positive from nasal swab. So it definitely happens, but this project we've been focused on, like I mentioned, on that specific link between females that carry it in their nose and giving it to their newborn lambs, and those newborn lambs giving it to each other when they join the main nursery groups in June or whatever. Um, one of the reasons why, well, one of the things you might expect if you aren't focused on rams is, those lambs that do survive are going to become reproductive. They will be in close contact with these rams a couple years down the road. But we've not seen that happen yet, that we know of. But I think that speaks to one of the reasons why we got to put some thought into how we wrap up the monitoring of this, right? Because there is rams out there. One of the reasons why we think we can get away with just focusing on females and their lambs is that rams don't survive as well as females, so they may naturally clear it quicker. And we've seen evidence of that. Like I said, we've had hunters kill a couple of those rams. So, something that I'm thinking about, just to provide more information on this as part of that wrap up monitoring is maybe we sample some rams too. So we have an understanding of the proportion of rams that were carrying that bacteria when we started, and it would be interesting to know how that's changed over the time that we've done test and remove here. So, yeah, it's a good question.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about the historic numbers of sheep on the Fraser and what is possible? What do you see as a realistic number on the Fraser down the road? And then on top of that, what's your measure of success? What would you say, hey, if we got to this number, I would be, or maybe it's some other measure of success. I don't know what it is, but what would you consider successful if we were to achieve this at the end of when this is all said and done?
Yeah, it's a good question too. So it's super challenging to piece together how many sheep we had on the Fraser River back in the 90s. That study area crosses two different regions. So those surveys in the past weren't coordinated. The way surveys were done back in the day, yeah, it's hard to make sense of it. So what I did though is piece that together as best I could with surveys that occurred at certain, similar times and similar ways and that kind of stuff. But I came up with an estimate of about 2,800 sheep um, north of Lillooet, and um, but it's kind of shaky, like I said, just due to those challenges. Um, some of the data on specific bands of sheep might be better. Like in Churn Creek, for example, we knew there was at least 450 sheep in that band of sheep there, resident sheep. Same at the junction. So some of those groups of sheep, like currently the junction is less than 100, and Churn Creek, in terms of residents, are maybe 20 or something. Um, So, yeah, I mean, when we started, we thought we wanted to get back to what we saw in the 90s. So that's our objective. I think if we get to numbers like that again, we're going to have to be putting a big effort into making sure we provide productive habitat for sheep, and that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's the goal.
Awesome. Chris, Hannah, any thoughts on you? Chris, what's your measure of success? What's your goal in this, Chris, and what's society's involvement on it?
I agree with Chris. I mean, I think my number's probably a little bit higher, but judging by the habitat in there, but I think if we can get to those numbers that Chris talked about, that'd be a huge success. If we get another 1,000 more or 500 more, I think that's an even bigger success. But like Chris stated, it's can the habitat sustain it, and what do we have to do to maintain that habitat? And I think, we kind of touched on it earlier. What does that look like? And I think once we get past the disease component, it really becomes habitat work and how we implement that on the ground and what we do with that and assess that habitat to make sure it is productive with bunch grasses and those other species that those sheep are looking for. So, yeah, I think that's my measure of success is establishing what we had prior to the die-off is would be my measure as well. So, and obviously that's the objective. And I don't know whether it was you that stated it or whether it was a quote that you related to me is trying to leave it in a better state than when we arrived or what we did. And right now it's not in a better state than when I started with the society. So, before you let me retire, it needs to be in that better state before I can sail off into the sunset.
Sounds good. We'll keep you around for a little bit longer, buddy. Um, Chris, if we had a call to action for our listeners and our supporters, like what do you need? What do you need from us? What can we do to support your efforts on the Fraser, to make sure that you have what you need to get the job done?
Well, I think you guys are doing that. Yeah, I mean, you know, if there was people that were sitting on the fence, helping out with the lamb counts, I think is a good thing. But I mean, the Wild Sheep Society is doing it, right? So we're doing it. And that a lot of the funding, everything comes from all the members, right? So yeah.
Awesome. Chris, Hannah, anything from you guys? Any call to action? Anything that you want to see? Any parting remarks before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think I agree with what exactly what both of our Chris's had to say there, 100%. The only thing that I think for myself personally that I could add to that is I think all three of you know I've got a passion for predator management. So when any of you are out on the landscape and if the season is open, by all means do something about our coyotes that are on the landscape. They do quite a number on our lamb population. So make that count where you can.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. And I think, that's the next steps too, right? We get the disease wrapped up. So what can we do? And I know Chris has turned his mind a lot lately to habitat work on the Fraser as well. So there's lots more work to be done. But I do want to shout out to our members and our supporters for the support they've given the Wild Sheep Society BC. Obviously, there's been a ton of hands in this, and our fundraisers, and then the many partners that we work with, and there's many of them, and just everything from little bits to a huge amount of effort. So thank you to each and every one of you for your support. And then the professionals on this call tonight. I look and I've looked, and there's a life of work that's gone into test and remove and disease work, and you guys are so passionate, done an incredible job, and there's this whole ecosystem of people that are just really passionate about wild sheep and healthy wild sheep in the landscape. So thank you to each and every one of you, and then Chris Procter for your leadership. I think it's pretty safe to say that this wouldn't happen if it wasn't for you. And there's been some rocky roads along the way with different things happening with, whatever it may be, but you've always been 100% behind this project and making it happen. So I just cannot thank you enough for what you've done to support this project and other projects too, but particularly the Fraser River project. So appreciate that.
I got one thing, Kyle. It's, we kind of touch on what our members do, and I'm assuming most people that are on this call are going to be members, but if you do know somebody that's sitting on the fence and how can they contribute, it's either buy a membership or buy a raffle ticket. Those raffle tickets, the money we raise off those raffles, that money goes here. It goes right on the ground. We don't, it goes into our gaming account. We can't spend that money anywhere else. It goes on the ground back immediately where you want it. So whether it's 1 ticket or 10 tickets, whatever it looks like, you guys are making a difference by supporting with those raffles. So don't be discouraged by thinking you're not doing enough or not doing. Every little bit contributes to the success of where we are. And like I say, it all stemmed out of a simple conversation over a beer. I don't know, how long ago was it, Chris? Probably 12 years ago.
Something like that.
Yeah. And we weren't drunk either. Just to be clear. Again, shout out to our members, but if you know somebody that's sitting on the fence, that's a way that you contribute and make a difference for wild sheep in BC.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks again tonight for your time, Chris, Chris and Hannah, all three of you for all your support. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We are going to do some giveaways here. So Daryl Hosker, when we did our 9 is the New 8 campaign last year, led by Mike Bridger, and Mike did a phenomenal job of presenting that. And again, Chris Procter, thank you for your leadership on horn aging in the province. Daryl donated a bunch of shirts, and he wanted to make sure that we did a bunch of giveaways. So we're going to give away a few things tonight here. I did a random number generator ahead of time, but you had to be on the call. So Brad Moore was the winner of 9 is the New 8 t-shirt. So Brad, if you could text or email me and let me know your size, Hannah will get that shipped out to you. Onyx Elite, our conservation partner, they gave us a 1-year Onyx Elite membership. And our winner was Dr. Helen Swanson. This was a random number generator, but Helen won it. So congrats, Helen. Hopefully that's useful for you on the landscape. And then we have another 9 is the New 8 t-shirt, and Greg Sawchuk's the winner of that. So congratulations, Greg. So thanks, everyone. We're going to continue this webinar series. We've got, I think, 5 total so far. We'll probably add a few more as well, but we've got 5 for sure. We've got Mackenzie Clark to talk about the Soroptes project in the Okanagan, and we have Alicia Woods to talk prescribed burns, Adam Foss, and then we're going to do horn aging stuff. We've got a date for that, but we don't have a presenter just yet. We're working through some nuances there. Thank you, everyone, for your incredible support. Thanks for tuning in tonight, and we'll see you on the next one. Appreciate it. Thank you.